Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's event. My name is Katie Cantrell, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Greener by Default. I'm joining you tonight from the unceded land of many different peoples, including the Multnomah, Cowlitz, Clackamas, Chinook, and many other tribes. This year's theme is Charting Progress, Celebrating Community. While there is much to celebrate, I also want to acknowledge that, at least to me, this feels like a bit of a strange time, in many ways a transitional period. COVID showed us that society is capable of rapid transformation in ways that we never dreamed possible. We glimpsed a world in which transportation emissions and smog plummeted, and in which nature and wildlife populations began to rebound. Now, as COVID slowly ebbs, knock on wood, and society returns to a new normal, we find ourselves at a turning point. We can continue catastrophic business as usual, or take our learnings and fight for a better future. I've been in the sustainable plant-based food space for over a decade. I founded a nonprofit dedicated to educating people about the harms of industrial animal agriculture. So I spent many years giving very depressing presentations to lots of people. This did make a real impact, but it's hard to try to change people's minds in order to change their behavior, fighting against all of the cultural forces selling the standard American diet. That's why I decided to try to change the norm, to make it easier for people to make better choices. We like to think that we make our decisions based on carefully reasoned deliberation, that our beliefs drive our behavior, but often the opposite is true. We make decisions based on what's familiar to us, what the people around us are doing, and the path of least resistance. And then those behaviors subconsciously influence our idea of what's normal, what's reasonable, and what's possible. For instance, someone who was raised believing that you need a big hunk of meat at the center of your plate at every meal, and whose only exposure to plant-based foods is mushy black bean burgers or unseasoned tofu, is going to be a lot more resistant to ending subsidies for factory farms because their experience tells them that cheap meat is an absolute necessity for daily life. Whereas someone who regularly eats delicious plant-based meals will be a lot more open to discussion about how to transform our food system. That's why I started working on Greener by Default, using behavioral science to make it easier, more appealing, and more accessible for omnivores to choose plant-based options, encouraging so-called flexitarianism, and getting outside of this paradigm that vegetarian food is just for vegetarians. Our ambitious goal is to flip the norm in institutional food service, so that instead of having meat as the default and putting the onus on people to specially opt into plant-based, we make plant-based the default and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. This nudges people towards a more sustainable option while preserving freedom of choice. My discussions with institutional stakeholders over the last few years have really highlighted how much progress we've made. I thought that I would have to spend a lot of time explaining the benefits of plant-based foods, but people really seem to get it. Customers and employees are asking for more plant-based options, companies are under pressure to cut their carbon footprints, and the cost of animal products, especially poultry and eggs, has gone up dramatically. So it's really a matter of how rather than why. And that's why at Greener by Default, we provide technical consultation to institutions like corporations, universities, and hospitals. In the program's first year, we were able to implement successful pilots with LinkedIn's San Francisco office, which switched from serving majority meat to majority veg entrees, and implemented an oat milk default in their coffee bar, and with New York City Health and Hospitals, which has now implemented plant-based defaults for patient lunches and dinners at 11 public hospitals in New York City. At LinkedIn, by switching the ratio of entrees from mostly meat-based to mostly plant-based, and by using appealing names focused on flavors and ingredients rather than calling out a dish as vegetarian or vegan, they were able to serve half as much meat while maintaining high diner satisfaction ratings. The reduction in meat served over the course of a month was equivalent to 14,000 kilograms of CO2, which is like driving more than the circumference of the Earth. The oat milk default in the coffee bar also cut the carbon footprint of milk served in half. The New York City Health and Hospitals pilot was equally successful, with about 60% of eligible patients opting into the default plant-based meal. This is expected to switch 850,000 meals per year from meat to plant-based. Plus, they're actually saving $500,000 per year as a result of the program and providing patients with heart-healthy and culturally appropriate meals, so it's truly a win-win. This is revolutionary progress, and it's just the beginning. We're now working with corporations and hospitals across the country to leverage these wins and make plant-based defaults the norm. We also work with events, which are one of the easiest and most impactful areas to make change. On an event's RSVP form, simply switch the default. So rather than having a meat default, unless people request a vegetarian option, explain that veg is the default and offer a box to check to request meat. This simple switch results in 40 to 80% of people sticking with the plant-based default. And there's no pushback because those people who have restricted diets that require meat or who are just diehard carnivores have meat available to them. They are freely open to choose it, so they're happy. And the vast majority of people, it turns out, are happy to stick with veg when it's the default. They just wouldn't have thought to go out of their way to request it. Making sustainability the easy option and preserving people's autonomy and freedom of choice can truly transform our food system. It can also create a positive feedback loop with people who are regularly engaging in sustainable behaviors becoming more open to supporting further efforts and legislation. We've seen tremendous progress over the last decade. Though there have been a lot of gloomy headlines about the plant-based industry over the last few months, reports of its death have been greatly exaggerated. While retail sales of certain categories of plant-based meats have stagnated, sales of plant-based dairy and egg products continue to grow, along with sales of plant-based dishes in restaurants. Also, 86% of consumers who are buying plant-based meat are also buying animal meat. So this is not just a niche market of vegetarians and vegans. And at the same time that Beyond Meat's stock declined, Tyson Foods, which is one of the world's largest meat producers, also hit a 3-year low. Lately, the plant-based meat industry has also come under fire from some environmentalists as well. While I absolutely agree that we should always strive for the best possible products produced in the most just way, I do think that the urgency of the situation calls for looking at this through the perspective of harm reduction and not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to end factory farming yesterday, but the unfortunate reality is that 99% of animal products in the United States still come from factory farms. Several studies have shown that even if every other sector became completely carbon neutral, energy, transportation, buildings have zero emissions by 2050, but we keep eating the way that we're eating, the food system alone will push us past 1.5 degrees of warming. The simple fact is that there is no sustainable way to raise 10 billion animals for food every year in the US, nor 60 billion worldwide. There's actually only enough pasture land in the US to meet less than 30% of the current demand for beef with free-range cattle. So unfortunately, the solution is not as simple as turning those billions of animals loose onto pasture. The current level of meat consumption is simply unsustainable, so we really need this combination of less meat and better meat. It's not easy to transform one of the most influential industries on the planet, which is why we need all hands on deck and all strategies on the table. The average American is still eating fast food 3 times a week. They're not about to switch to lentil and kale salads. We need to be able to meet people where they are and offer them accessible, delicious, and familiar foods. And we need to celebrate every step in the right direction. Whether that's trying an Impossible Whopper instead of a beef Whopper, or sharing recipes and photos of your delicious plant-based meals on social media, or just ordering oat milk in your latte. Whether large or small, we need to celebrate all steps in the right direction. And in case you doubt that a meat-loving culture like ours could ever change, I want to give you some hopeful news out of Germany. The country best known for its schnitzel and bratwurst now has the highest rate of vegetarianism in Europe. Consumption of all types of animal products has fallen over the last 2 years, and as a result, they slaughtered nearly 5 million fewer animals in 2022 compared to 2021. And one of their largest supermarkets just pledged to start selling less meat and more plant-based proteins in order to meet its sustainability goals. This is an excellent example of how all of these forces can work together synergistically to make sustainable plant-based foods the new norm. When they're the default at events and in your workplace, when your friends are all eating more plant-based foods, and when these foods are featured in supermarkets and restaurants, suddenly the sustainable choice becomes the easy choice. This is also where community becomes so important. We can help reinforce these new norms, help introduce people to the joys of taking action, and help lift up people and celebrate the steps that we're all taking. Because we certainly know all too well that the situation we face is daunting. We're faced with a deluge of depressing news every day that sometimes can make it hard to even get out of bed. But if we know that we are all in this as a community, we can find the strength to keep fighting and find joy in being in this movement together. So thank you again for being here tonight. If anyone is interested in bringing Greener by Default to your company or your event, you can post in the chat. My colleague Kamanani is here and would love to connect with you. or you can visit www.greenerbydefault.org. Thank you so much.